Music can be really tricky in today's theater world. The audience expect some type of soundtrack to underscore the beautiful moments of your story, but they have no idea about the crazy hoops directors have to jump through in order to license music legally. It can honestly be so frustrating that many educators are now trying to write their own original music for their shows. But that has its own traps and pitfalls. What software do you use? Where do you record? How do you record? On this episode of Critical Dramatics, I interview Brandon Tanner, a professional writer, composer, and producer. He also teaches voice lessons, music directs, and privately tutors, and I know for a fact that he has the voice of an angel. I asked Brandon on the show to provide some of his knowledge on creating music in a digital age, walk us through his process as a composer, and let us know how he's been overcoming the challenges of making music in a pandemic. Today we have Brandon Tanner, hopefully my first guest and not my last. Um, Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started?
Sure. So I grew up in the Houston area, attended the University of North Texas College of Music for composition, and ever since then have kind of worked freelance compositionally, teaching music, composing music, arranging music for various things, just kind of as opportunities present themselves. And so I, I kind of have a life as I have like a day job that involves non-music things, and then I have kind of an afternoon life that involves teaching music and being like a music instructor, and then I have an evening life that involves being a composer arranger. So it's a lot of different things.
That's actually like really interesting. So I just want to kind of unpack two of those
Sure.
a little bit later on, but let's start with the first one. So you do a little bit of composing. What do you compose for?
So there's a lot of different avenues that I've kind of gone into. When I started college, I was 18 and I had it in my head that like, I'm going to go to LA and I'm going to like get into
Yeah.
film and I'm going to, it's just and that is not what happened, obviously.
Yeah.
But, I got into college right at the start of the new millennium.
Hmm.
And the landscape kind of changed almost overnight while I was in college. Like, it used to be, if you wanted to get into media composition, like, of course, you go to Hollywood, you go and do movies, and like in some cases television, but television was always kind of seen as almost like lesser, right?
Hmm.
Like, so like your eyes on the prize for like film or whatever. But
Yeah.
during college and a little bit afterward, it changed. Like there's, film culture became much more about blockbusters, and so fewer and fewer movies got released year over year.
Mm.
Television started to enter into like a serious golden age. Like it started to become more prestige television, and then the big medium that just kind of started to take over everything and is still doing it now is video games.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a bigger market than anything else that media has right now, and especially if you're, you know as a musician or a composer and you're thinking like, I want to write music for something, there's so many independent developers, small studios, medium-sized studios, big, AAA outlets. There's just so many different ways that you can go with that. And so I ended up, when I graduated, I actually, the first gigs I ever got were arranging and writing for high school marching bands, for halftime shows and stuff like that. I still do some of that now. But that was kind of my foot in the door. And then a few years after I started that, I happened to almost stumble into a small independent game studio who just ended up liking something they'd heard that I'd done. And
That's
they
so
were like,
cool.
"Do you want us? Do you want to write for our first commercial release?" And I said, "Sure." And so now I'm working with them still. They that release did well, so they were able to kind of continue developing. So I
Hmm.
do that, and then uh, various other things pop up. I got involved in the theater world a few years ago, and now I'm a music director for various things, and that has given my arranging chops a workout. And it's just,
Hmm.
yeah. So if I told younger me, that this is what was going to be happening, and like, no, you're going to like touch all these different things, and he just wouldn't know what I was talking about. But really, like, just having all those different outlets, I think has been good at creatively, and also just being able to not put all my compositional eggs in one basket.
I think that's really cool. And I especially like how, to anyone listening to this, you really do have to put a lot of fingers in a lot of different pies these days as an artist.
You
Um,
really do. Yeah, I think it's crucial. If you go in thinking like I'm only going to work in this sector, your odds of success just plummet drastically. It's just no, because you so much of finding success in the arts in the first place is kind of luck.
yeah.
I mean, you can have all the talent in the world, all the skill in the world, you've got all the training that just there's can't be beat. But like, if the right person doesn't see it, hear it, you're not in the right place at the right time. You're not you don't find that moment of discovery, right?
Hmm.
Then it ends up going nowhere, and it's just like you may as well not have had it, right? So like you have to learn to define success, I think, also in multiple different ways. Like, I originally wanted to be like, well, I want to be a composer, and this should be my job, and that should be it, and I don't want to have to do like anything else. But
Yeah.
putting all these different fingers in different areas has been allows me, I think, to grow more as an artist, and not so much have to worry about like, yeah, I have a couple different jobs. Some of them are arts related, some of them aren't. But when I really look at it and think about it, I'm like, I think actually for my art it's better than if I had like stuck with just one thing and like continued to churn out the same kind of stuff all the
So
time.
I also think it's really interesting because it reflects a lot of like the reason I didn't try to pursue professional acting was because at the end of the day, I was like, I can kind of write and I can kind of act, but I'm not a dancer. I'm not a singer. And I just didn't feel like I had enough tools to make myself that sort of like flexible person. So I think that is really important what you brought up is you really do have to be flexible and diverse.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I think it's even more fascinating when you think about how like technology has really changed recording music and audio. I mean, literally what we're doing here today would not be possible 10 years ago, 20.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, and I think another thing is like how, in my opinion, and I'm a big nerd. I think video games are gonna start becoming a bigger and bigger art form. Um, and I think we've seen that as like we've moved a branch started to create of like story-based games or games that are purely like aesthetically pleasing and not grindingly hard as they were like, back in the 80s. How do you feel about that? Like video games as an art form?
I think, I mean, I think that's inevitable. I think we get some of that now. And I mean, part of the whole taking over the landscape thing, they throw just as much money at blockbuster games as they do at films, more in some cases. You get these games that are like, state of the art, you're cutting edge, you're basically filming movies for like, cutscenes and like, introductory movies and like whatever, and they're scored exactly like that. The process really is not all that dissimilar from scoring for film and television.
Hmm.
And as more and more, I think more and more people that are kind of on the top of their art have started to take notice, and more of them get involved. Video games use, famous actors now. They use famous
Yeah, the casting.
musicians. They use everything. People started to take notice, and they're like, oh wait, this is like a whole other avenue. And like, honestly, the audience in many cases is bigger. You have
Hmm.
a potential to reach more people depending on how big the project is.
Yeah. And I think that that also kind of expands sort of what like this whole podcast is about, is like how important technology is. And so I'm a little curious about focusing on some of your composing. What's a day like composing for you, or a couple hours, as you said, the evening?
Sure. I mean, I think if you ask this question of like 100 different composers, they'll give you 100 different answers. I think the for me, everyone's got their own workflow. If I'm working on something specific, I have some kind of deadline that I'm trying to reach, or some kind of, I tend to write at night because I'm more of a night person. So I
Hmm.
feel the most like invested and like awake and alert at night. And so those are the hours that I give to it. In my slightly younger days, it would sometimes go to like 2 or 3 in the morning. That's not really a thing anymore. But I still do write in the evening. So it depends on the project, really. I'm the kind of person who like really works well under a deadline crunch
Hmm.
situation. So I can sit down if I've got a project that's due in like 3 months, and I sit down and I start trying to look at it. I'll often just find myself staring at the screen for hours, and there's just nothing there. But if I wake up in like a dead sweat panic, like a week before, D-Day, so to speak, all of a sudden, like it's all there. So I think I have to like shock my brain into a sense of fight or flight almost
Hmm.
to do that. It's not always the case, but sometimes just to work through like writer's block, I do that. If I'm having a normal night and I'm just writing, and it's not even for something even in particular, you know, sometimes I'll start by sitting down at my piano and just plunking some things out. Sometimes I'll sit down and for whatever reason, I have an idea that's already found itself fully formed, and all it's missing is the translation from me to the electronic medium to get it into the work. And I know here is where usually like you can occasionally get questions like, where does it come from, where do you get your compositional ideas? And like the truth is like no composer can actually give you an answer to that question. We don't know. Like it just there's just
Just the void.
it's different for everyone. It's just, I think it's a combination of like, we're the sum of our experiences, and like what you've experienced musically or artistically, or like how you've grown up, and like what you're exposed to. They tell writers, you should read 1,000 words for every one that you write, right? And it's very similar for music. You should listen to 1,000 notes for every one that you commit to paper. Like we take things that we've heard through our lifetimes or been exposed to, and we reconfigure a lot of things, and our brains just kind of slot them into new, different ways, right? So it's a strange experience, and it's hard to describe.
It's actually really interesting that you bring that sort of thing up, because, when you're thinking about like from a teaching standpoint, one of the biggest theories there are is blooms, and that is like there are certain levels or like gears that our brains kind of work on, and when we're working on a subject, we have to start by like understanding it, and then we work our way up to apply and then analyze, and then at the very top is create. um, and I think it is something important for people to understand, is that like getting to that creation thing is weird. Everyone's process is different. I know, like, so you were describing like waking up in a panic and a sweat. um for me, it's like putting that pressure helps trigger my brain into being more creative. um and if I don't get that, sometimes I literally, I'm like you, I'm just like, I don't have anything. I feel like my words that I write are not great, or the tone I'm putting out there is not good. But then sometimes I'll randomly just get an idea, and I'll just be sitting there like eating a sandwich or something, and it'll pop in my head, and I'll be like, "Ooh, I gotta type that in." So it's really interesting that you bring it up, that it's almost like cross curricular or throughout all of fine arts, even maybe even like to STEM and math, that just like creativity is ethereal and random.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think if we could figure out what it is for each individual one of us that would keep our brain in that mode all the time, we would do it all the time. But like, I can't, we can't. There's something elusive about it that nothing works 100% of the time, right? I just know what my tendencies are,
Hmm.
and so I know that 90-95% of the time I can count on my brain to suddenly realize something's due in 3 days and like kick itself into gear, right? Or if I'm just sitting at my dining room table like eating, and like then something comes into my head and I have to like record it immediately, and it
Hmm.
just, I don't know where it came from, but I know I have to get it down because it'll go away like just as fast as it got there, right? So it's just trying to stay on top of how our brains work, and we just don't understand the half of it really.
Yeah. Um, so I actually want to take a small detour kind of from the list that I sent you, and I do want to ask, like, educationally, how well do you feel like you were prepared in through high school and college and maybe even some like internships? Did you feel like you were really prepared for what you're doing today?
So there was something that my freshman year composition professor at North Texas, Dr. Joseph Klein, who was the chair of the department, said to the assembled room of 35 incoming freshman composition majors. And that was, he said, "I cannot teach you to compose." He said, "What I can teach you is the tool set to take what's in you and apply it. But I can't teach you to take your own inborn talent and how it speaks to you and how your brain like processes what composition is." He said no one can actually like teach you like, this is literally how you write, you know, the
Yeah.
symphony that's sitting in your head right now. He's like, what we do is we show you the shortcuts, we show you the secrets, we teach you music theory, we teach you, orchestration, we teach you to listen to, the greats of our industry,
Hmm.
and kind of see how their processes work. And through that, the idea is that hopefully something will click in your own creative process. But because of that, he also said, there's 35 of you in here right now. And he said, about 30 of you will cut yourselves from the program before, like, we're not going to do it, but you will. Like he said, that's just statistically how it works, because, it's just, there's something, um, he said, and I'm not a super believer in like, you either have it or you don't. Like, I've always felt like, especially when it came to music, like, people who tell me like they're tone deaf or they can't sing, and I was like, I just don't think you've been taught correctly. Like, I've witnessed people who think they're tone deaf just, you know, throw some voice lessons at them and they can at least get to, some level of competency.
Hmm.
But I do think it is easier for some than others.
Hmm.
And this, I think this crosses all art and even science and math and whatever, and that like you're born intrinsically with kind of there's a skill set that you're kind of wired toward. It doesn't mean you can't make other inroads. It just means that there's going to be certain things that for you are going to like feel a whole lot easier than they will for other people. And that's kind of where people will run up against a wall.
Hmm.
And what Dr. Klein was getting at, being like, 30 of you will cut yourselves, and that'll just be people who run up against a wall that they just decide they either can't push past, or they don't want to exert the effort that it would take to push past, or they just find it's not for them.
Yeah.
They just decide that this is actually not what I thought
Oh
it
yeah.
was, and I need to redirect to something else, basically.
So what I really like about what you were kind of talking about and your professor is that there's this theory in education going on right now, and it's really popular. It's called constructivism.
Have you ever heard of this?
I haven't. No.
Okay, so it's all theories of learning have all kind of adopted and changed, and really started getting practiced in the 1960s. But this one started popping up sort of towards the 80s. But the idea is that everyone constructs their own idea of how the world works. And so when you're teaching someone, you're throwing out, these words and these graphs and these images, and they are then inside their brain, like trying to construct and build that meaning towards it. And I really liked what your professor was saying, because I feel like that really aligns with the idea that, you know, I there is no truth. There's just kind of how things tend to work, and you have to construct your own truth. And whether that's through music and like building how the music sounds in your head and then putting it into the instruments that they've given you, or whether that's through theater and figuring out what your process is. Um, Really, really cool. I'm glad you touched on that. Um, but talking about toolkits, I'm a little curious. As a composer, what's yours? So, if you want to talk to us about like sort of the technologies, the softwares, maybe even like your setup.
Yeah. So once again, like being in college right at the start of the 21st century, I mean, tech had been in music at that point, for a little while. I mean, but it started to really take off in the late 90s, early 2000s, where it kind of got to the point where if you didn't use tech. It's so funny because starting out my freshman year, they wanted all of us freshman composition majors to hand write all of our scores and
Mm-hmm.
everything. And somewhere between my freshman year and my senior year, that went away. They just stopped doing that. Like we were on that, but that was like the big transition point,
Mm-hmm.
and I had used in high school, like I had like a cheapo copy of like Finale that I would doodle around on. But by the end of college, the tools had started getting so much more sophisticated. I mean, you were, you know, you know, digital audio workstations like Pro Tools and things like that were really like coming into their own. You were starting to get more and more sound sample libraries that were getting better and better quality, so you could start to make things sound more like real instruments than you could before. And that's only gotten more and more accurate as we move into now. And so I've always been there's some composers who work natively in those kind of digital audio workstations like Pro Tools and Cubase and all of those. And I have, digital audio workstations, but I'm still the kind that, because of my training, like I need to see the score.
Mm-hmm.
So I work out of Sibelius, and I have Finale. I have a couple of music notation programs, but I write from there, and so that I can see it, and then I transfer what I've done in those over to my digital audio workstation, which is Cubase,
Mm-hmm.
and you just transfer it over as MIDI data. But then I also have ready to go, like just tons of libraries of samples, effects, instruments that I can plug in to get things going. And so it's kind of a two-step process for me: write the score, then transfer everything to the workstation. And honestly, that part takes longer than writing the music, like for me, because I spent my formative years in writing music as a write it in the score kind of
Mm-hmm.
person, as opposed to kind of natively doing it in workstations.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of creates an extra step for me, where some other composers, it's not that, because they just work straight from it. But that's what works for me. So I try not to rock that boat too much, because
Yeah,
yeah, otherwise things don't turn out so well.
it's really interesting. So like right now, I had to teach myself how to use Audacity, um,
Right.
and which really wasn't hard. And there's so many like YouTube things out there. So um, uh, how difficult do you find the technologies you use?
When I first started with it, the learning curve was pretty steep.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot, when I was starting college, you could, there were independent producers of music and things that can like master their own stuff or be their own audio engineer, but we were still kind of in an era where well, no, if you're going to do like an orchestra thing or whatever, and a live orchestra is going to play it, an audio engineer is going to master it. Your job as the composer is literally just write the thing.
Mhm.
And now that we're in this era of, well, now you've got engineering in a box. So the composer is expected to kind of be their own audio engineer, to be their own technician, to be their own mix master, you know, in
Mhm.
addition to having written the music. So the skill set has had to expand, and I've mostly had to self-teach myself that stuff because that wasn't really stuff that was covered in all that much detail when I was back in college. And it wasn't that long ago, but like it's just become so ubiquitous now. You just have to know it. Once I and I still learn things every day. You
Mhm.
know, I'll find something, you know, I'll read something on some support forum or whatever, and someone will offhandedly talk about, you know, like, okay, well, when I do this, and I was like, you can do that? It's like, wait, I've been doing it like this 15-minute way forever, and like you did it in 30 seconds. Like, you know, you have to constantly be okay with just like absorbing new information because these things change constantly.
Okay, so I'm curious, what are some of the things that you've picked up, or just things that you're like, these are your basic sort of like mixing things that you should know?
So the biggest thing that I had to learn early was mix with a pair of headphones that gives you the flattest response rate possible. Early on, when I was trying to experiment with composing in digital audio workstations, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and I had a pair of headphones that like just boosted the heck out of bass like crazy, and like I would mix to that, and then like I would export it to something else and I'd listen to it and it was just unlistenable. Like it just
Yeah.
like the levels were like so off. Like, so you want the flattest response possible, and then honestly, the best thing you can do if you know nothing about how to mix music, you know, to audio, you're just like, I just write, I don't know anything about like, you know, any of this stuff or whatever. YouTube is the greatest resource
Yeah.
I think the arts has ever had. There are like, don't pay for a class. Like, you can go on YouTube and find someone every bit as knowledgeable for nothing that will teach you things in like an incremental way. Like if you pick a certain, you know, there's tutorials on Finale, there's tutorials on Sibelius, there's tutorials on Pro Tools and Cubase and Logic, and you know all these things that, and a lot of a lot of people in like the, you know, the independent music community like produce these things and they're just like sharing it, and that's a resource you just have to avail yourself of because you
Hmm.
can. And I'm definitely the kind of person that needs to see something in
Oh,
action
yeah.
in order to reproduce it. So being able to watch and then go, okay, I can do that too, and like here's what it is, and then I know what it is, as opposed to like reading it. And I mean, I can retain information reading, but like I'm much more of a visual,
Oh,
show
I
me the
feel you.
thing so that I can reproduce it, and then my body knows kind of the steps and the motions that it went through to do that. So YouTube, I mean, I was just hours and hours of YouTube over years and years, and that's my biggest piece of advice. Look, it is out there, and you're just, you, it's literally just a couple of finger strokes away on your keyboard.
So something I'm really obsessed about, let's just say that,
Okay.
is equity in education. You know, just this idea that like making things equal is not good enough because, you know, I started off from a pretty privileged background with some weird like starting blocks. I mean, I'm American. That's already like really good for me. A middle class family. I'm white and I'm male. So like, I just, doors are open to me that are not necessarily open to other people. But something I've started to become like really obsessed about is how do we make these people who are starting farther behind, you know, how do we catch them up? So I want to throw this at you, and I understand if you're not prepared, I'm just going to literally cut it all out. But if someone had no money, so let's say a teacher or a kid, and they're like, I got to make a song for this one thing, what would be your suggestions? What would be like some of the software or some of the places to go look?
I have a couple of concrete answers for you and a couple of more abstract ones. one of the things about how technology has taken over music production, you were right about, we're not all starting on an equal footing here. Um, I came from a fairly privileged background myself. I was, to the point where, I was able to go to college, and
Yeah.
like, and I have no student debt from that. And and it's,
Congratulations on that.
thank you. I actually had to get a scholarship for having cancer to do it, but I don't recommend that path. But there's the technology is great, but it's expensive. And
Mhm.
even now, like the libraries that I've amassed have been a piecemeal building little by little as I've had, I have a couple $100 here, a couple $100 there,
Mhm.
make the occasional big purchase into it. It's really has been an investment, for like the last 15 years post college for me, and like getting it to where it is right now. But if you're looking to like get your toe in the water and be able to produce something that can be a respectable like sound, and you want to do it in there's so many free resources because of just how big the technology has gotten.
Yeah.
I mean, for starters, most of the big like music notation software houses have free versions of their programs. They're more limited, but then there's also some that are kind of like open source, that allow you to kind of write. MuseScore comes to mind, but like Sibelius and Finale both have kind of like notepad versions of their
Mhm.
software. There's so you can at least like get something on a page. And then as far as translating something to like a digital audio workstation, there are several extremely cheap options for that. I actually have a digital audio workstation called Reaper. It is a fully functional, like has almost all the big bells and whistles as
Mhm.
like a Cubase or a Pro Tools, but is geared toward smaller, more independent producers. It actually is, you're allowed like a basic and almost an unlimited trial period with it, and they don't disable any features or anything. And then at the end of the trial period, they only ask, I think right now a license for Reaper is like $50. Like it's like nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the license agreement works where it's like if you make like less than 10,000 a year on music or whatever, like it's only the license is only $50, and like more than
That's
that, it's like a
awesome.
little more. Yeah, so like that's a way to go. And then once you've got those two basic things, finding samples and sounds. So many people make samples and sounds now and practically give them away.
Yeah.
You can search for, they'll run the gamut of various quality types, so you definitely want to like play around with what you find. But there are some software houses that their whole thing is producing like budget samples or budget sounds and things that frankly, if you had dropped them like 10 years ago, would have been state of the art, right? So
Yeah.
that's you know what I mean. So like there's definitely, now that the tech has been with us through a couple of computing generations, which is insane to say because it's only been like 20 years, but that's
It
still
really
like that's still
is.
a few computing generations. Like stuff that would have been state of the art last gen is now just pennies on the dollar, right? And so you
Mhm.
can, if you search around, you can find all that stuff. So it's more accessible than it's ever been. Early on, when tech was becoming the thing in music, it just was not accessible at all. Like I got to experiment with it some in college, but they had thousands of dollars worth of setups,
Oh
tens of
yeah.
thousands,
And
things like
labs.
that,
Mhm.
labs and everything, and you had to go in. But now, because it's been around for a while, you can get comparable quality things for comparatively little.
That's really awesome. And it's something that I think about a lot is like the sort of freeze you get when you think about starting something new or taking on a new task. When I had to start figuring out how to do projections when I was directing high school, it was I was the person to do it, and I had no idea how to do it. And it was literally me and another student just kind of like figuring things out and trying things. Um, but I do know that like if someone were to be like, Sean, we're going to give you $1 million if you can make us a decent song, I feel like I could with the stuff that's out there. Give me like a week and I could make a song that someone could bob their head to. It's not going to be played on the radio, and
Sure.
and I'm not going to be the one singing it. But I feel like I could make something that someone would be like, oh yeah, that's passable. So what would be to help people kind of get over that sort of like mental block? What would be sort of your tips or tricks for starting out mixing or making music, for teachers and students?
I think it's important not to try and overfill your plate at once. So, I'm guilty of this. I have a tendency to big picture a lot of things where like in my head something is going to be really big, but then like the logistics of like making that thing happen become
Hmm.
almost overwhelming. And so if you're starting out, and you don't have a lot of experience in composition or making music or anything, make your projects small, and set your goals accordingly. So because there's multiple steps to the process, maybe just decide like I'm gonna, write a little thing for piano and get it down and get it, electronically recorded and, figure that out. Don't start by having like a multi-instrument layered,
Yeah.
thing, right? You want to start with more single instruments. Piano is a great example just because, it's such a versatile instrument that covers, every octave imaginable, and you can but if you're only having to balance that one instrument, it's a good way to start training your ear to hear like, what different sound settings sound like, what different, mixing settings sound like, what you like personally, because everybody's mixing style is different. And there's some music producers out there that can tell you who mix something just by like, listening to the mix itself. And it's just like, I cannot do that because I'm not a music producer. I came at it from composition, but like,
Yeah.
but being able to develop your ear to do that means that as you get more and more comfortable using your software, your ear is developing at the same time. So eventually things that seem like they were really difficult are just going to be things that your brain is immediately going to go, oh, I want it to sound like this. And that means I check this box and I move this line and boom, it's done. And
Hmm.
then it becomes second nature over time. Don't, it's kind of the same advice I give to, anyone trying to learn an instrument, or, if I'm teaching piano or voice or whatever, and it's like, don't bite off more than you can chew before, it's the crawl before you can walk, before you can run situation.
Hmm.
Don't set unrealistic expectations if you're literally just starting all this out. There's a lot of info out there. There's a lot of things that can make things overwhelming. So go easy on yourself by not trying to absorb literally all the information all at once, because you will burn yourself out. It will not. Yeah, that's how a lot of projects get left abandoned.
And I think that's important because one of the things, my background heavily comes from one act play. And like there are all these weird rules with this theater competition and all this stuff. But one of the things that's picked up a lot of traction lately is the fact that you can play as much music as you want. You just have to get the rights to it. So what a lot of people have done is they're just like, I'm gonna have a student or myself or a teacher in the school write the music. And we're either gonna play it live or we're gonna record it. Now a lot of people have had huge success with that. Um, and I do think you're right that you do have to kind of start small and build your way up. Uh, so I do switching just a little bit, kind of from one of your hats to another. I'm really curious, how has vocal coaching, which I know you do a lot of, and I don't know if you directed anything, but I'm curious if you have, and acting been in a pandemic?
So I haven't directed anything, but I have music directed. So I mean, I can't really sugarcoat, like, vocal coaching during the pandemic has been not great. Like, it's just not ideal. You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
it's there are just some things that you have to do in person, right? It's not that you
Yeah.
can't. It's not that you can't impart some information over a Zoom call or whatever. But the problem we run into oftentimes, and actually this kind of ties back into like kind of access and things like that. But like, you're at the mercy of tech,
Hmm.
and like, so whatever your student has is what they have. Whatever you have is what you have, and you might have something that's like top of the line, state of the art, but your student might be like, I've got my phone, that's it.
Yeah.
And depending on what kind of phone, like, does their microphone like lose certain frequencies? Does it like, how
Hmm.
fast does that microphone peak, and then like it overblows and like you don't hear what just happened? How's their internet connection? How's your internet connection? Are you missing like entire things? So during the pandemic, I've 5 or 6 students over Zoom, on a regular basis. And some of them, it's gone really smoothly because we both kind of have similar setups. And some of them, like, it's just a lot of things have to get repeated. We have to try different strange things. It's been an experience, for sure. There are a lot of challenges just endemic to it. And honestly, my heart goes out to people for whom like teaching, like vocal coaching and stuff, is their vocation, their main vocation.
Yeah.
Because I just, with just the 5 or 6 students that I have, like it's just been almost nightmare levels of trying to figure out how to do it. And I just can't imagine a studio of like 25 to 30, like trying to figure out how to make that run smoothly. So those that have pulled it off, I mean, more power to you. All the like, hat is off. Like, I don't know how you did it, but congratulations.
That strikes me as I try to think, like, when it happened in the spring and we all had to go virtual, in the public sector, uh, it was really rough. And I talked to some of the band teachers at the high school and junior high level, and I talked to our JD, our director of fine arts, and he was just like, they got to do what they got to do. Kids playing horn, and you kind of have to tell them, I think you're doing it right, I think you're doing it wrong. So I am curious, what would be the best setup in your mind? What has worked really well for
Um,
pandemic vocal coaching?
right. So for the couple of students for whom it was pretty good, like we rarely had issues. I mean, if you've got a checklist of like, this is what I need to make this as close to an in-person lesson as possible, you need a grounded setup, like, to either computer or a laptop. Like, trying to run a lesson through a phone is
Mm-hmm.
just a nightmare. Like, honestly, trying to run a lesson through Wi-Fi of almost any kind is tricky. So when I'm teaching, I'm doing it through my laptop, which I have wired my internet to,
Yeah, with an
like
Ethernet cable.
through an Ethernet cable, so I'm not getting weird interruptions. And then I have like a mid-range, like Logitech webcam.
Hmm.
Although it literally very recently gave out on me. I'm having that replaced at the moment. And because I'm a composer and I do audio stuff, I already have a pretty good microphone,
Hmm.
so that was not an issue. But you kind of need your student to have those things too, in a perfect world, right?
Yeah.
Because that gives you the best, like, and if the camera is set up just so that you can see, like, as a vocal coach, being able to see, like, the shape of the mouth, and like, as they're,
Mm-hmm.
being able to see those things, that they're not standing too far away, because webcams are great, but like, they get grainy the further away you go, and like, if you can't really
Yeah.
quite tell what's going on, that's like the pristine best setup. But I would say the most important thing of all of those things is wiring the internet. I cannot tell you, Wi-Fi has like messed with student, like, getting back. Like, if your student is using their phone, just like postpone. Like I can't I can't stress that enough. It's so difficult. And that's just for voice. Like imagining I used to teach trumpet privately. And if I had to teach trumpet right now and someone was trying to play trumpet into their phone microphone, I would quit. I don't I don't know how that I don't even know what that looks like, because luckily right now, I'm not teaching trumpet. I'm only teaching voice. I do know a couple of piano teacher friends of mine, and I've taught piano at various times, but I'm not currently. And they've said that they have a little more success just because they can point the camera kind of at their keyboard and their fingers.
Mm-hmm.
They can have their students do the same thing. And so it's less about what it sounds like and more about, are they using correct technique and things like that.
Yeah.
So I can see how that might be a little easier, but with voice, like technique can get lost because your internet connection's bad, something stutters. I can't quite make out the vowel sound and shape that you're making in your mouth. I can't really tell when and if you're breathing because it's too sensitive emotion for your camera to like show me that like, you've inhaled basically. Like, it's just, it's those kinds of things. So internet, I think, is priority one. And then priority two is microphone. Like if you're using a phone mic, there's just so much that can go wrong. Having a good mic is paramount.
So currently, I for those of you out there who are interested, I purchased a little USB microphone, and that's what I'm using to record all my audio.
Yes.
How does it sound? I'm curious.
No, you sound good. And here's the thing: USB mics used to be noticeably inferior to standard audio jack mics. That's not really true anymore. There's still like an audio and any audio engineer that's listening right now just like basically cursed my name to like the seven hells. But it's not that they've caught up necessarily. It's just that they've gotten to a point where they're not the worst. You know, like and honestly, for accessibility's sake, they're the best choice for a lot of students. They're the best choice for they're the best choice for a lot of non-professionals, because you don't always have like, that pristine audio jack setup, that you can run things through, and a USB mic that's able to just kind of handle its own stuff, powers itself through your PC or your laptop or whatever. It's not ideal, but they've caught up enough that honestly, sometimes you really can't tell the difference. It's just. Yeah.
So for those of you out there who are listening, I hope there's like one person listens to this. I have a blue ice snowball. I know it sounds like something you eat, but that's literally what it's called. You can look it up. This was on the lower side, and it was literally me like just checking 2 or 3 websites about like what kind of microphones look good or sound good. And this was, I think, $40 at Best Buy, and sometimes they go on sale for even cheaper. So for those of you out there interested, there are really affordable things that can work pretty well.
And will definitely work in a lesson setting. If you're talking about actually recording pro audio, obviously no.
Yeah.
But like if you're dealing with, you need to teach a voice lesson and you need it to be on something that's not, your student's tinny sounding phone mic or your tinny sounding, phone speaker or whatever, whoever's on whichever side the tech gap lies. Yes, there are cheaper solutions than like going out and just, being like, I guess I have to buy a whole audio setup now.
And it's kind of interesting to me to think that like, if I was in, let's say, a choir teacher's shoes, I might buy like a set of these and somehow set it up to where the students could come and like rent them for certain things. I think maybe even just for like advanced students, like if I had a small class, I don't exactly know how choir works because my school didn't have music, but I think you could feasibly use some of your money and purchase like a set of these and have your students be able to sing and listen to each other. So anything else, maybe advice on the pandemic or things that you've seen have really worked for your music directing or for your vocal coaching?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously this is a challenge that of a type that we've really never faced before in arts education, at least in this country. And they didn't. This wasn't in the textbook, so to speak. When they were teaching, and for those who are full-time teachers, as opposed to part-time, I play one on TV. Like it's I can't even imagine. Like it's just this is not stuff that gets gone over. They kind of got thrown to the wolves, and just like figure it out.
Yeah.
Like this is now, but in some cases that some people have gotten innovative, and it's necessity, mother of invention, and this is how we do things. I have seen on an individual level, if you're teaching individual students, it's possible to sort of alter thoughts and ideas about how to teach an individual student, like a vocal coaching student or an instrumentalist or something like that, to encompass areas of musicianship that maybe don't get touched on quite as much when you're in person and worried more about, what do they sound like right now or whatever. I mean, I've assigned things to students like listening exercises. I've told them to go listen to this, go listen to this. We can have discussions about it. We can talk about, it's easy for me to like rewind something and say, do you hear this? Here's what's happening here. That kind of thing. There's music is such a wide, there's so many different areas. And performance, obviously, when you're vocal coaching or instrumental teaching, is the primary focus, but creating like true musicians requires more than just the focus on performance. And so there are other aspects that can be focused on, I think, to help kind of round out that education. As far as ensembles, I have yet to see a piece of tech that can get everybody synced up in ensemble playing or singing. I've seen, some cool like little virtual concert things where you record your part separately and like it gets, put together later, which is kind of cool. But you do kind of lose that sense of being able to just rehearse a group. I think we're a little ways off from being able to reliably rehearse an ensemble in a virtual setting. And that's one of the big challenges right now.
So that actually leads perfectly into my last question. All right, Brandon, if you had to be a teacher, you're a public school teacher this year, what would be your approach? And I'm really curious because you've done a little bit of teaching, and obviously you're actively teaching, but I don't think you were the de facto teacher in a classroom ever, were you?
So not as such. I was the jazz band instructor for a high school for about 5 years, but that was an extracurricular class, and it was more on like a paraprofessional type of thing. It's just band. We had a jazz quote unquote program. It wasn't like a class, so to speak, but we met like 3 times a week after school, and like ensemble. It was an ensemble for them. If I was back doing that kind of thing, so like if I was teaching jazz still like at a high school level, I would probably take more of this listening approach. Now in jazz, that's kind of part of how you learn it. So it would just be me more focusing on that aspect. I could see doing, maybe breaking out some exercises of like, learning how to improv, things like that. Have students like record themselves improvising over like a chord structure that I send them like a recording of, and like, sending those things in. Or like if we meet as a group, me sending out or having them listen over Zoom to some jazz standard or chart or something, and we dissect it and we talk about it and like see what's going on there. As opposed to, because again, you try and run a jazz band on Zoom, and it's not going to go well. So that kind of individual, like, well, let's teach you guys some individual skills you can send me recordings of, and let's kind of do big group listening things. My approach might be similar if I were teaching something like choir or something, to be honest with you. I feel like you just kind of would have to, if you are in a situation where you've got to be teaching your ensemble online, you know,
Yeah.
I think I would just have to kind of rethink my whole approach to, okay, I'm teaching music, but what does that actually mean? Right. So,
Hmm.
you know, if we obviously can't rehearse like a big group number. So can I give them individual challenges? Can we listen to things as a group? You know, can we do things over Zoom that are making them better musicians, even if it's not touching necessarily on their performance chops? Maybe something that, you know, you can try. You know, I've done some sight reading exercises over Zoom. You know, things like that. You can do one of those things. It's like, go down the row. How's everybody doing? You know, that kind of stuff. You know, I think I would probably experiment with those types of things. Anything to kind of keep, you know, them engaged. Like, here's something we've not done before. Let's do this. Here's something else we've not done before. Because man, that engagement, I think, is like 90% of the fight.
And the reason I asked is because, so many times I feel like public school teachers get really bogged down with this idea of like, I've got to get the teaks. I've got to follow the curriculum. I've got these performances that I'm hoping I'm somehow going to magically do in the spring. And I do think getting someone like you, an outside observer, who's just like, let's rethink what is teaching music. I love that. I love that term. What is teaching music? I think that's so important. And I love your ideas. As you were talking, I was starting to think, I wonder if you could like get a band or even just like a choir to sing different parts of a song, and then either you, the teacher, or you put it on students, put it all together and release something.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Did something similar to that near the start of the pandemic. I was music directing a teen production of Into the Woods that unfortunately did not get to perform.
that's
And
sad, man. I'm sorry.
and as a consolation, our director, she had everyone record their part for the end of Act One, just the finale going into the end of Act One,
Hmm.
and she put it all together, and we got to have like, you know, they got to have one, you know, performance of a, you know, of a song, since we didn't get to
That's super
actually do
cool.
it in person. Yeah.
Yeah. We're starting to kind of get to the end of our hour. So I kind of want to wind some things down, but I do want to note that, like, for those of you who don't know, so many shows, so many performers, so many theaters are hit really hard right now because what can you do? And I think some of the things that people have done, like Brandon, I saw you in singing online several times, either for your own solo projects or helping people out for concerts and things like that. And that's amazing. But how creative can the fine arts get during a pandemic has really been the question on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, for sure.
So I wanted to thank you for your time. I really appreciated getting to hang out and getting to learn a lot. And I really hope that anyone who listens to this is able to take away some basics of how to get over that sort of fear that people sometimes feel when they try to do something new. And then also know that, like, hopefully they got to take away some ideas of how to survive as a fine arts teacher, music teacher, choir teacher in the pandemic.
Absolutely. Had a great time.
I want to thank Brendan Tanner for his time on the show and his work creating the intro and outro music for this podcast. Critical Dramatics aims to provide professional development of technology in the fine arts classroom and information over areas in technical theater. Thank you for listening.